this back office, finance, bookkeeping, accounting piece. Why should creators care about that problem set?
Because it helps you grow faster. Mr. Beast is an excellent example. He grew so fast because he was an expert at managing cash flow and working capital. Every time he'd do a video and he'd get a brand deal, he'd immediately take all the money from that brand deal into the next to make it bigger, because it would get even more reach. And that would get him another different brand deal that was even larger. He'd then put into the next video, and it just progressively continue and cycle.
Welcome to the Creator COO, the show where we surface the operators behind your favorite content and creators. I'm your host, Matt Estes. Today's conversation is with Eric Way, co-founder of Karat Financial, the black card for content creators. They've raised over $30 million from Union Square Ventures and Y Combinator, as well as from top creators such as Graham Stephan, Nas Daily, and Josh Richards. In this episode, we explore how Karat is filling the gap in financial literacy for creators. We talk about navigating co-founder dynamics and scaling creator businesses, and we discuss the importance of financial management and operational partnerships in the creator economy. So, with that, I bring you Eric Way. Let's dive in. Eric, thanks for being here. Welcome to the podcast.
Matt, it's a pleasure. Thanks for hosting me today.
To start things off, I'd love to hear a bit about your experience as the founder of Karat.
Yeah, I co-founded Karat about 4 or 5 years ago because I used to work at Instagram. I helped build Instagram Live, and I got to work with so many talented creators who were developing new businesses. And I was like, there's going to be millions more people doing this the next few years as it becomes easier than ever to make content, distribute it, and to monetize. And unlike the old Hollywood model where you're either, Justin Bieber or you're not, there's going to be tons of folks who are going to be making a living doing this who don't need to even be in Hollywood. And gosh, they need help handling their business back office and their finances. I met creators who were making literally 6-7 figures in income, who weren't even incorporated, weren't paying their taxes, couldn't get a mortgage because they had no credit history, couldn't get a credit card with any sort of reasonable limit. I think a really good example, one of my good friends is this chess streamer named Alexandra Botez. She is one of the top streamers out there with over 1 million followers. She graduated from Stanford. She was rejected completely outright for a business credit card multiple times. And for my co-founder and myself, my co-founder coming from Goldman Sachs in the financial piece, we're like, wow, someone needs to go and build the business financial infrastructure for this new class of businesses. The same way that Square did this for mom and pop in-person SMBs, what Stripe did for online e-commerce businesses. And hey, why can't that be us? That's really the origins of our mission. And of course, it's been a long 4 years in terms of specifically what we did from a product POV and how we built relationships with creators.
Is there something about the creator or maybe the psychographic of the creator that makes understanding some of this financial literacy stuff more difficult than the average American or maybe somebody else in the tech economy?
Yeah, I think there's two unique things here. The first, a lot of them in the earlier stages of the creator economy started content because they were really passionate about that thing, whether they made videos about knitting or Pokemon cards or gardening. It's because they were almost savants in that one specific area and later figured out, turns out other people like to see this too. And turns out people want to pay me money when I talk about it. They're so smart and they've been entirely specialized for what they love most. That doesn't leave a lot of time to figure out the business backend. The common saying, right? The two things in life you can't avoid are death and taxes. And it's because both of those things are things we don't like to do and eventually have to do them. But when you force somebody who is doing something that they're passionate about to focus on a part of the business that they probably hate, of course, they're going to push it off as long as possible, especially because it's still early to build a creator business. It's still very unpredictable, it's still spiky. People are still figuring out the right structures and teams to have in place in order to succeed and scale. I think the second reason why, when I graduated from school, I knew a lot about how to run a discount cash flow model from Corporate Finance 101. I didn't really know how to file my own taxes or build up my own credit score. personal finance has never been as key of a focus in the educational curriculum as, whatever you majored or minored in. And for many of these creators, that's even more so because many of them dropped out of school or did even go because they're just so young. And so there's just like an even bigger gap.
I can relate to that as somebody who started in investment banking right out of college. I was probably better at building an M&A model than I was doing my own taxes.
Oh, 100%.
Going back to a slightly earlier topic we were talking about, specifically about Karat and your founder journey, you mentioned you have a co-founder. How'd you meet your co-founder, and how did you know that co-founder was the right person to build a business with?
I think if you're thinking about starting something, of course, while you're considering your founding team, the idea, your business model, your funders, I actually think the co-founder is the most important thing because this is your day one. This is your do or die. And if you don't like the people you work with, why are you even doing this at all? I met my co-founder because I knew to meet the right person, it's like dating. You can't necessarily force it. You have to make your own luck and expose yourself to as many opportunities as possible. So I moved to California very much in that spirit. Before coming to California, where I moved to San Francisco, Menlo Park, and I joined Facebook and Instagram, I had been a consultant and a banker, as you alluded to, where I was completely on the East Coast. And I met tons of super sharp folks who really wanted to be consultants and bankers versus try and build something new. So the very first thing is like, I need to move out here. And the second thing was, every single possible event or coffee, I would take it because you don't know in the short term where any of those relationships can lead. But if you keep doing it, that consistency, eventually you'll meet someone and something that leads somewhere. So my co-founder, I met him because I was at Facebook. I was a product manager. An engineer on my team said, "Hey, Eric, do you want to come to board games tonight?" I never really hung out with him socially, never got to board games and other people. But it's in that vein where you have to be curious. You have to try and meet as many people as possible. I was like, sure. So I went there and my future co-founder was hosting. And I was like, oh, this guy's really cool. He came from a similar background as myself. He was at Stanford. He had worked at Goldman. He was starting his venture fund. He's very focused on, building a business. But he also had that passionate side of him that wanted to figure out what is this all for. He told me if he wasn't going and starting his own venture capital firm as a 21-year-old, he would have instead pulled a Henry David Thoreau and run off into the woods and made pots. Because he was a very good pottery guy. He was teaching pottery classes. That's a guy I want to get to know more, right? This isn't the classic, I just want to stay here and make lots of money. This is a guy who's trying to figure it out.
It sounds like you had a lot of personal chemistry.
Yes. So important. Yeah. We were friends for years before we did anything together.
I have a general hypothesis that there are some similarities, but also some differences in terms of the sort of technical, non-technical co-founder relationship in startups, and then the creator and the creator COO relationship in the creator sphere. Given your background finding your co-founder and also your experience working with lots, a diverse array of creators, what parts of your journey, sort of finding your co-founder, do you think you could apply to the creator COO realm?
I think there's 2-3 things. I think the first piece is understanding why you're doing this. Because there are creators out there who intentionally don't want to scale. The beautiful thing about the creator economy is if you just want to keep doing this on an ongoing basis and support yourself and you don't want to grow, you can do that. It's an economy precisely because we have small, medium businesses very much in that mindset. And then it probably doesn't even make sense to bring on a co-founder because, as you know, managing is very different from doing. And when you bring on a co-founder, there's an element of managing that relationship with them. You're probably going to bring on others. And if you're just no, I love the editing. I love the filming. I love putting it up. I have an agent to handle my brand deals. I don't even need to do that in-house. Cool. You're probably okay. The second thing, though, is if you realize you want to grow and scale this in any meaningful way, it's a recognition of the things you like and the things you don't like. I have met so many creators who absolutely really like editing. Graham Stephan on his main channel still edits the videos himself, despite the scale that he's at. I've also met many creators who hate editing so passionately. Or the filming. I remember one of my very first podcasts I did with Nas Daily, Sire. And I was trying to set up the cameras for a podcast and I was asking him questions. He's just like, I don't know. And I don't really care. For him, right, the passion was always around the people he was meeting, the stories he was telling, not around the editing, the production. And then there are creators who thrive on the business piece, go out and network and bring in their own brand deals, and ones who are just like allergic to it and don't even know how much they're making. And so I think the second thing is, if you're going to grow it, it's recognition of what do I really like to do and what do I really not want to do, and find somebody to cover that other piece.
It's interesting you bring those two up in that order, because I think I've talked to 14 of the top creator COOs in the last 3 weeks or so. And the two things that have come up when I've asked about potential friction points when COOs have evaluated creators to partner with, the first one was aligning on expectations about like, what do you want this business to be? You know, do you want it to be a lifestyle business? Do you want to really grow it? Do you want to scale it? And the second one was related to your second question, which was around like, what do you like doing? What are you good at? What are you bad at? What are you willing to delegate? And then this exploration of like, what's the creator's sort of level of trust and willingness to generally delegate?
Oh yeah.
How did the trust piece factor in for you finding your co-founder?
You're right. It's the most important thing, especially as a creator, because it's your face going out on everything. To let somebody else begin to shape the direction of the content you make, to change your thumbnails and titles, it's scary. Even on my own podcast, I'm working with a brilliant YouTuber who's thinking through about changing our thumbnails and titles. And every time he makes a suggestion, I have to like remind myself, the part of me that's like, oh, it's like, well, that's because I see, there's a personal connection there, but I have to be thoughtful about what's better outright for the channel. To your point, how do you build trust? My co-founder and I had been friends for years, and we had known each other well before we decided to start a company. You see this a lot. Mr. Beast's CEO is related to his family by blood as well.
You see a lot of spouses, a lot of kids with their parents, childhood best friends.
I think John Yashai, if I pronounce his name correctly, John, I love you. His wife has really stepped up to run and manage his business.
Jay Klaus just announced on LinkedIn yesterday that his wife was stepping up too.
He's bringing her in full time. And yeah, I think the reason why you see that on such a prolific level compared to, say, the more classic SMB, it's because YouTube is still like really, really new. We don't yet have this readily accessible class of people working in the industry. Like, it's still really hard. Forget even a CEO. It is really hard just to find like a good producer, a good videographer, a good editor. Even for ourselves on our own channel, our short form and long form editors are all through people we know. So I think the first thing on trust, especially in the creator economy, we've seen most often, it's just someone you already know. Now, the much harder question is, well, that sounds amazing and all, but what if you just don't know them? Like in any other job, you hire someone, you did not go to school with them. You are not childhood friends. And that's where I think a lot of what you said around that expectation setting and those open lines of communication become really important. My co-founder and I, we do co-founder therapy every week. And, this is even on top of the pre-existing friendship. When we started the business, I knew that the nature of the relationship would change, because when you're friends, you don't need to really resolve a disagreement on something. You can just, let it pass. Like, I don't care. Like, I like this guy. We don't need to agree on this. Well, when you're running a business, guess what? You're presumably both doing it because you really care. And if you both really care, it's a really shitty way to resolve an argument by saying who cares more and who gets exhausted first. It's much better to outline, like, who owns what areas, or like, why is this person coming this way?
And just a quick pause there, just for my own lack of understanding. So co-founder therapy is kind of like marriage counseling, where you bring two co-founders together and you work with a therapist through conflict.
It really is just couples therapy, but for co-founders. Yeah, it is a lot like couples and marriage counseling, right? Because you are together in a partnership.
I haven't done co-founder therapy myself, but I'm definitely a big proponent of having the hard conversations up front and early and often. And that's something that comes up a lot when I'm talking to creators and creator COOs. It's like, if you're gonna start working together, whether it's full-time, part-time, contract, whether it's an equity relationship or a profit share, you're tying up together. It's a marriage of some sorts. So have the tough conversations early, and it pays off over time. Don't leave the things unsaid that should be said. As I've sort of gone out and talked to folks and done this survey, the number one catalyst that I see, the most frequent catalyst that I see for creators to bring on creator COOs early is what I'd call like a COO junior, like a business manager. And it's almost always because their inbox is a disaster and they feel like they're missing out on brand deals and they're dropping potential opportunity. And then it seems that as the business grows, the types of problems that you're trying to solve pile up. And then you really get into that conversation of like, what does the creator like to do? What do they not want to do? What do they want to outsource? How do they get their force multiplier? And I found a lot of creators will hit this point where they're sort of deciding between, can my business manager scale into a real COO, or do I need to go find somebody either from outside the business or a spouse or a friend that I think can step in and do this role better. But there are a lot of different paths
I really love that framing that's the evolution of how you start from like, this is a passion to this is a business, right? When you're doing it as a passion, you're doing it yourself. Yeah, you only consider things if they're like directly, immediately very painful. As you said, like I am literally missing out on brand deals. That is money I could use to make more videos because I cannot manage my inbox. I need to find someone to help manage my inbox, right? Like to your point, that's how it starts because there's that immediate pain. And it's only later if like it continues to work. It's almost like every step you're like one moment ahead, one moment behind. You're almost like reacting to what's coming. And eventually you get to a point where you're like I have over 10 employees. Like now I need someone to think through the org chart part, right? But like that doesn't come until later. No one's sitting there, from day one. Even if you have a YouTube channel with millions of followers, if you're not at that scale, you're not like time to bring in an org chart to like, I'm trying to bring a CTO to clean my org chart and culture. It's, as you said, it's like, there's a pain point. First, it's like, help me manage my inbox, my brand deals, right? And then it's like maybe help improve my production editing schedule so I can like make more of this. And then it's like help me figure out like the content strategy, right? Like thumbnails and titles and like the types of content I should be making. And then it's like, what other ways should I be making money outside of what I'm doing now? And then as you sort of ladder your way up from manage my brand deals to like help me with editing to like what should my content be to I'm making money in other ways, eventually you're at the point where like, okay, cool. Like I need someone in-house.
Yeah, like most businesses, right? The more you grow and the more complex your operations get, the more the problems stack up, and then people who can solve those problems for you become very, very valuable. So one of the problems that I do hear come up fairly frequently, though, is this sort of back office finance, bookkeeping, accounting piece. Can you tell me, in your experience working with creators, why should creators care about that problem set in particular?
Because it helps you grow faster. I think there's a couple examples I always think of. Jimmy Mr. Beast is an excellent example. He grew so fast because he was an expert at managing cash flow and working capital. Every time he'd do a video and he'd get a brand deal, he'd immediately take all the money from that brand deal into the next to make it bigger because it would get even more reach. And that would get him another different brand deal that was even larger, who he'd then put into the next video, and it just progressively continue and cycle.
Do you think most creators have a good idea of where they're spending their money?
Oh, absolutely not. Just like most Americans working any sort of job, right? That's why you have so many financial gurus have become so popular, so many budgeting structures and budgeting apps. It's like, do you know how much you spent last month? It's like, no, not really. And now couple that with YouTube and being a creator, it's very unpredictable. Now, of course, there are many ways to try and build revenue streams that are more predictable, like, for example, what you offer. But starting off, a lot of creators face a lot of uncertainty on how is this video going to do and how that video is going to do. And so knowing the cash you have on hand really affects your ability to invest and go big. So as I mentioned, like the extreme example of that is like Mr. Beast, like literally doubling down every single time, right? But like a more tactical and common example, if you're a creator and a lot of your income comes from brand deals, well, okay, Q4 is always going to be really big for brand deals because brands are trying to run out their budget before the end of the year. If you really want to take advantage of Q4, that means Q3, you need to start amping up your videos and have the resources and production folks in place so that you can make a bunch of really good videos that are going to come out in Q4 and get all those brand deals. And then guess what? Q1 is going to be really slow. You're not going to get many brand deals. So how have you prepared your budgeting so that you're going to be okay?
Yeah, to your point, it's just to state that back to you to make sure I understand it. Your point is that creator businesses are pretty lumpy in terms of cash flow, or they can be. It is. And so if you don't know where you're spending your money, you don't know where your revenue is coming from, I guess a couple of things are possible, right? One is you miss out on opportunity because you're not investing the right way, in the right content at the right times, or hiring the right people. The other one is, I guess you could, if you didn't understand the lumpiness of your cash flow, you could also overinvest and get yourself in a pretty sticky situation. So you overinvest, in your example, you overinvest for Q4, cash is a little bit tighter in Q1, you didn't save for it. And look, now you've got to lay off, you got to cut 20% of your cost.
Yeah, that's precisely right.
Do you think, are a lot of the creators that you're talking to the first time, are they thinking about it that way? Or is part of what you're doing educating them on how to think about it that way?
These days about half. I'd say for half of them, it very much, I always think of it as you should only be caring about your business back office if you've really figured out, number one, how do I make compelling content? Number two, how do I find my following? And number three, how do I make money? Like, those are the basics. And if you've successfully accomplished those three, then yeah, I do spend a lot of time helping folks understand, like, this is why you need to care about these other things. One more piece beyond what we just talked through right now, there's also, like, it's going to catch up eventually. Like, I've worked with creators who've had their bank accounts frozen because they just haven't paid taxes for years. At some point, you will have to deal with this stuff. And then you're going to be potentially in the middle of creative flow where everything's coming out and you just have to stop because it's just terrible.
Yeah, I can see there being like the digital dynamic of like that bill that's sitting on your desk underneath some of your other mail that you just don't want to look at. Yeah. But over time, eventually, if you don't pay that bill, if you don't stay on top of it,
it gets worse and worse.
So I'm sure you've seen a lot of cases, good and bad. The question I'm about to ask, maybe anonymize this a little bit, but like,
sure.
What's the gnarliest horror story you've seen? Like a web of finances you had to untangle. And then on the flip side, what's the most interesting positive transformation story you've seen?
Yeah.
When somebody solved their back office problems.
I think a really good example of the first. So as we said, a lot of these creators, they start their businesses in like a friends and family type way. And I've worked with cases where like the creators' finances are so intertwined with the parents that it's very confusing who's actually making what. And I've had creators come to me being like, hey, I want to talk to you separately from my mom and dad being on the call. And like, I don't want them in my finances anymore.
So commingled finances, commingled ownership, and then you have to untangle that.
Yeah. And I don't even think in these cases, it's like the parent even had bad intentions. They thought they were like helping the kid or like helping them mistakenly, not correctly, but thinking that they were like, oh, somehow minimizing their tax burden. It's like, oh, no, money's going to the kids, all going to me. Maybe it's tax rate less. No, like the IRS isn't stupid, right? The money's going somewhere. So it wasn't even like the parent was trying to do anything malicious, but the kid was just like, well, WTF is going on? Like, get them out of my finances. And then it was just really weird because there's like different people in the creator business telling you different things. And eventually I think you're just like, this is above my pay grade. Like, you need to figure this out as a family. And it's hard because there's money involved and there's business and then it's personal. So I think those are the trickiest cases.
So there's bad ways to set businesses up.
Yeah.
Commingling finances with your parents is probably one of those. What's the best and cleanest way to solve the business formation problem? Yeah. Or the creator, this starts to get into, some conversations I've been having recently around the creator holding company construct, but
right.
What's your take on that? What's the right way to set it up?
Yeah. So I think the simplest thing initially, as I alluded to before, is don't worry about it at all until you're making enough money. And while you're doing that journey, you don't even need to be incorporated. You can be a sole proprietor and just write off your business expenses itemized on a Schedule C. There's this misconception that in order to write off business expenses, I need to be incorporated. That's not true. If I have done nothing, the IRS sees you as an unincorporated sole proprietor, and I'm still doing things like I am buying laptops and camera equipment, you can save anywhere from, 10 to 30%, depending on your tax rate, back on those purchases, literally just by writing them off. And yeah, that is why we advocate like, oh, you should have like a business card just to put expenses there, just to make it easier for tracking purposes. And I'd say once you start to hit a meaningful amount of revenue, let's say like 80, 90,000 plus, that's where you should think more about, should I incorporate? Because there's always trade-offs. When you incorporate, there's usually legal paperwork you have to go through. You usually have to find someone or do it yourself. There's usually fees to maintain your incorporated company. And when you incorporate, The most common one we recommend is just an LLC. And that LLC doesn't actually immediately really give you any tax savings at all. An LLC's main initial purpose is to legitimize you as a company and business and to protect you from personal liability claims. You separate out your business and personal. And then folks just assume, well, like if I'm an LLC, now I just get all these tax savings. Like, no. Like you then have to take an additional step and say, I'm going to tell the IRS how I would like this LLC to be taxed. And if you say, I want my LLC to be taxed as an S Corp, then you potentially get tax savings. An S Corp is a type of tax designation. It's a corporate classification, but it's one that doesn't like double tax you on like when the money comes to your business and when it comes to you. And the reason why it potentially can save you money as a creator, especially if you're making over a minimum threshold where it's worth the hassle, is because you now put yourself on payroll. And there's this whole set of taxes called self-employment taxes, payroll taxes. It can be up to like 15.3% that you have to pay on top of income taxes. 15.3% is a lot. Normally, when you were not an S Corp, you just paid this on all your revenue. But when you put yourself on payroll under an S Corp structure, you actually only pay that 15.3% taxes on the salary you're paying to yourself. That's really important because you designate that. It has to be at least a reasonable minimum. But beyond that minimum, every other bit of profit and revenue that the business makes, you don't have to pay it to yourself out of salary, which undergoes that 15.3% tax. You can keep it in the business and then you can distribute it to yourself as you'd like, which avoids that 15.3% tax. So you're basically setting up a way for you to avoid this whole set of taxes on a big portion of your income. And like this all starts to make sense, as I said, when you're making at least 80,000, 100,000, because there's a lot of hassle to figure out. And that's also important because you might start to hire other people and then you want to have those legal structures in place too.
Do you have any particular platforms that you recommend for people to do the incorporation thing?
So it's one of those classic cases where you can do it yourself just by Googling. There's like a Rocket Lawyer or whatever.
Yeah.
We often find creators prefer to, I just don't want to worry about this. And then they often just work with lawyers.
Interesting.
I highly recommend the Green Room folks. It's like Will Hanish, Kirk Goodwin. They're really trusted folks in the space of how many creators incorporate. They're really, really good. There's another lawyer I know named Noah Downey. He's known as I think your lawyer friend. He works a lot with like streamers. It's just like trusted folks who understand the creator space and they incorporate you at a relatively low rate because they know like I'm not going to make tons of money off the incorporation,
Sure.
But it's what starts the relationship.
I've started a few LLCs and I've always used Stripe Atlas.
Yeah, Stripe Atlas is great as well. Like there's many self-serve
clicks,
options.
You pay them a couple $100 and
yeah, I mean we used Clerky, right? And so it's not like it's an incredibly hard thing.
It's not that hard, right? And it's not rocket science.
Yes, and in fact, when creators ask me to help them in incorporation, the very first thing I tell them is, just so you know, like you can do it online. Here are the sites.
Yeah,
it'll cost you a few $100. Like if you do it with me, it'll cost you more. And they almost actually every single time they've been like, actually, can you just do it for me?
I think that portion of the conversation, we're talking more about earlier stage creators. But one of the things that, as I've talked to some of these larger YouTubers who often do have an operating partner like a COO, there's a couple of things around the holding company idea that come up over and over again. Curious if you have a take on these. The first is how do you structure your business if you have multiple product lines? So let's say you have like your S Corp, maybe you've got your creator S Corp at the top. You start a newsletter, that newsletter starts making money. You start I guess you have your YouTube brand revenue, your programmatic ads and your brand revenue coming in somewhere. Maybe you sell a course. Do you want all that revenue to roll into one S Corp? Do you want to set up separate LLCs? How would you think through that piece?
Yeah, so there are particular cases. So like, why do you even do this in the first place, right? There's really two high-level ones. The first one is just from an organization perspective. As you grow and you get really big, you want to be able to very quickly look at the P&Ls for each separate part of your business and have like different personnel. The second reason, like there are potential like tax benefits. So like, like one easy example is like there's this tax write-off called QBI. It's called the Qualified Business Income Deduction. And it's basically the ability to write off a certain portion of your income. like it can be pretty large. It could be like for creators, like thousands, maybe even more in potential savings. And however, there's a lot of stipulations of whether this deduction applies. And one of it really is tied to the nature of your business. Well, guess what? As a creator, some of the ways you make money probably would not classify and count for this write-off, but some would. And if it's all commingled, it's hard to make the case for getting this deduction because, look, like there's elements of your business that just don't qualify. But if they're separated out, you could be like, maybe the entity through which my AdSense is going through, that qualifies. But maybe the entity through which my brand deal sponsorships are going through, that does not qualify, right? And it can be like a 20% write-off. So it can be like very substantial in how much you can. The third reason is actually just from a liability perspective. You're just trying to protect yourself with, hey, maybe they go after this entity. Well, this one's still okay. Those are generally the three main ones I hear, but there are drawbacks too. It is more work, more administrative work and more bookkeeping work.
Definitely more administrative work. Yeah. There's a couple of catalysts for this coming up in conversations with COOs have been, one is I think there's some debate. There's a small group of VCs who are investing in creators right now. And it's a pretty small group. And I'm hearing this debate about whether the VC should expect to invest in the sort of parent S corp or whether they would invest in sort of subsidiaries. I think there's like pros and cons. There's some pros and cons for the creator. Yeah. There's some pros and cons for the investor. That's one of them. Have you seen any interesting approaches to that?
Yeah, this goes back to why would you set up multiple entities? One of it's from an organizational POV. It's like as an investor, when you invest in a creator, like what are you investing in? Are you investing like in the channel or like their spin-off course merch business, or like, hey, I just want to invest in like whatever the creator does. It doesn't really matter what entity it is. If they're making money, I want a piece of this. And so like there are great cases of like creators so like Leonhardt is a top YouTuber who like opens up packs of Pokemon cards. And together with Knight, he also started a company called like Rare Candy that's like focused on like selling collectibles and marketplaces and such. Like obviously that business is tied to Leonhardt because he's helped promote it, but like they definitely should be separate. It would be weird to be like, I'm going to invest in like Rare Candy, but like, no, like I want to take a stake in Leonhardt's YouTube channel. He'd probably be like, wait, what? So yes, I do think when it comes to taking investment, it's actually much more important. We've seen it done in a bunch of ways. Like generally the folks investing in creators, there's only a few of them, right? There's like Slow invested in a Marina McGilko. They gave her capital in exchange for like X percentage of her earnings. And in her case, from what I remember, they actually were down to carve out a big portion of her YouTube earnings. It was like tied to like a very specific base that I'm going to get paid back from. There's a lot of these companies, like Creator DAO is another example. It's in Drayson back there is like 20 million. Michael Ma is a friend. He's an investor in us. We're an investor in him. They recently started collaborating with a creator named Zoe Unlimited to like help her spin up a new channel. So in a way, the investment is tied to like that channel. And of course, you have a whole slew of folks who are like buying up back catalogs, right? Like Spotter's done this,
But to your point there, I think it's like if you're the creator or the operator and you're thinking about taking investment, there's a bunch of different ways you can structure the business, terms you could structure into the contract. But I assume it's all going to come down to like, what are you trying to do with the business? What's the price? What are the terms? Ultimately, it's a negotiation, I suppose.
I think the number one thing, even above which entity you should set it up, is like, why are you even doing this? Like the whole point of the creator economy is most of the creators here are bootstrapped. Like if you're making content your audience loves and likes, you should be able to support yourself off of that. In a venture scale model, you take on investment because there's presumably some sort of initial moat you need to overcome or some sort of initial traction you need to build. We're not going to make money. Like Facebook getting users, right? You don't want to monetize too early because you'll lose them, but you have to be able to pay your employees to get those users. As a creator, you don't see that as much. It's like, if people like your content, you should be fine. And so the number one thing you have to think about as a creator when you're taking on capital is, why am I taking on capital? And is my ROI, is my return on the capital I'm taking higher than the cost of giving it up, like 30, 40% or whatever.
Yeah.
So like, to give you a great example, right? So one of my creator friends, who's also a Karat client, also an angel investor in us, is named Lizzie Capri. And she took a Spotter deal because she's pivoting her content. She started off making child-friendly content. She's been doing that for years. She has millions of followers. And then she realized existentially this isn't satisfying to her anymore. She wants to make more adult, target a older demographic. That's like a really big pivot. And so if anything, it makes sense to offload some of that risk and take money from somebody else. And the return on that for yourself, for her, could be really large if the new channel works. But I don't think it would have made as much sense if it's just business as usual.
Yeah. Well, yeah, to your point, like if you're producing content the right way, you can bootstrap because it should be very cash flow positive, all things considered. Yeah. But if you're going to do a pivot in your channel, or maybe you want to launch a CPG product, or you want to launch a SaaS product, then yeah, maybe it could make sense to raise.
Totally.
What are some of the revenue streams outside of ad revenue that you're seeing get traction with creators these days?
Yeah. So almost every creator makes brand deal money. And a lot of creators don't like that because brand deal money is so spiky and all over the place. A creator friend once told me that he doesn't even feel like he's running a business. He feels like he's playing the lottery, where he makes hundreds of thousands of dollars from brand deals. Like he's successful. He's done collaborations with the biggest brands in the world. And every time he's like, oh gosh, like I wonder if this brand is interested, and let's go back and forth on the pricing. Let's go back and forth on the creative. Cool, I've now made the creative. Do they like it? And there's been times where he spent a lot of time making the video and he sends it back and the brand's like, I hate this. And he's like, well, okay. And then he's like, well, do I actually perform? And there's this really funny dynamic now where he is tired of the content that he makes. He wants to try other different sorts of content, but that's terrifying because as soon as he does, of course, the views on that new type of content will be worse than the new one. Like, duh. Or, sorry, the views will be worse than what he's doing before. And now that means when he goes out to brands with his media kit, with his rate card, they're like, oh, wow, like your views are way lower here. And, you know, sure, he can be like, oh, let me explain, like, this is a different style of content, whatever. But, you know, most brands are just going to be like, I'm going to pay you less now. And so he's like, well, I'm tied to this brand deal hamster wheel where I can only get paid here. And now I can't even do content outside of it because it's going to affect my brand deals. And so he's desperately trying to figure out how to develop another offering, whether it's a course, it's a product, or membership.
Yeah. So what is the solution to that hamster wheel?
So I think there's two ways to go about it. So the first one is ultimately many of these like new ways of monetizing, like starting memberships or starting your own product, they're dependent on your audience caring about you as a creator beyond just your content. And so as a creator, if your content is the type where no one actually knows who you are and like what your personality is like outside like the 15-second clip they see on your TikTok, yeah, they're not going to convert. And I think we've seen that, like, you know, TikTokers who just randomly jump over and try and start memberships and go to Patreon and such. Or like, you know, there's a thing last 2 years where these TikTokers would go to VidCon. Like no one would show up for the meet and greets because nobody actually knew who these people were.
It seems like there is something specific about TikTok to some degree. Have you noticed that? It's just, I mean, you can parse that a few different ways, but I've definitely observed that the creators who invested too heavily in TikTok over the last like 12 to 18 months and not enough in places like YouTube with longer form content, they're struggling.
Oh yeah. Like as a TikTok creator, or really any sort of short form, you are so focused on top of funnel. You have to figure out how do you build that deeper engagement. So I've seen a few examples. I think one of the straight up best out there, Alan Chicken Chow. He recently started a long form series that's basically K-drama, but optimized for a YouTube audience. And before that, he did a lot of like comedic skits targeted for a younger audience. He has some crazy number for like over 20 million or whatever. But his long form usually was just like compilations of his short form. His new long form series, he's getting millions of views per episode because it's similar enough to what his short form was about, but different because it's like a soap opera. It's like a K-drama episode that people are like, well, now I actually want to engage and watch in. And he's now getting that long form engagement he never would have gotten as a short form creator.
TikTok is so great for discovery and it's great for audience acquisition, but just as you put it, it's not great for building like brand affinity, audience retention. It'll be interesting to see how TikTok deals with that over time.
Yeah.
If they even feel like they need to. I mean, I get different perspectives on that every day, but interesting to see how they deal with it. Let's assume that we're talking to a creator who either making money through programmatic ads, making money through brand deals, assume that they've figured out the long form, short form thing a bit. Maybe they've got, some decent audience retention. What's the first, if you were giving them advice on how to build their business and expand to new revenue streams, what are some of the first things you would bring up to them?
Yeah. I think the very first easy thing, it is memberships, right? If your audience genuinely cares about you already, there is high potential that if you give them some sort of unique content that you're not putting out in your main channel, you can very easily test and assess, like, do they care? Like, well before you even go into a physical product or like a course offering, this is sort of the way to like test and see. You're literally like, you already like my content. Do you want more of it? And be willing to pay a little. And if they're just like, no, I don't care. And it's like, oh, you've got to make bigger changes to your content strategy before necessarily you're like, well, I'm going to go super hard now on courses and like products. I think of it as, it's just like from a company POV, you've done brand marketing and advertising. They've come in, fantastic. Are they going to convert? Like as a creator, you have distribution, you have audiences, and presumably you're sort of passively monetizing this via AdSense or a little bit more actively via brand deals. Now here's like, oh, creators audience, like my followers, are you like literally going to buy something from me, right? And like a membership, it's just like the easiest way to just be like, cool, like here's the behind the scenes. And you'll see creators who've built really strong loyalty. Like The Yard is a great example. The Yard is hosted by Ludwig and several of his friends. Every time they post on YouTube, they get hundreds of thousands of followings, extremely devoted. Their Patreon's like, oh, here's like some more content. Here's like some behind the scenes stuff. And it makes like, I forget the amount. I want to say like 6 figures a month. Like it makes it an extremely high amount because people are just like, yes, please, I would like more.
Yeah. It's interesting to see how different types of creators approach the content that they'll put behind the paywall in the first place and how they relate that back to the stuff that they create in front of the paywall. And I've seen some pretty unique approaches to that, particularly with more like entertainment lifestyle creators. I think when you have educational creators, it's a little bit more straightforward. Hey, I've got something to treat. I've got something to teach. I can drive a transformation. With the entertainment creators, I think and I don't know much about The Yard, to be totally candid, but entertainment creators actually often have things that they can teach because a lot of times their audiences are somewhat aspirational. And then there's the whole piece around sort of building belonging and togetherness and, feelings of being special and exclusive with the behind the scene content. So more people can make it work than you might think.
Yes.
If they're just a little creative about it.
I think that's a really good framing. It's all about, as a creator, think about what's the value your audience is getting from you. Think about like, why does anyone watch content in the first place? It's usually like one of 3 buckets. Like, I am learning something, right? I am entertained. I feel connected. I am forgetting about my troubles for a little while. Different types of creators have a different mix of the value across those 3-4 areas. And then it's like, whatever your main one is, how do you build upon that to build that into your memberships, right? Like, as you said, like your Ali Abdal, like so much of it is this, I want to learn. I want to be more like you.
He's driving transformations. That's what he does.
Exactly. So if he rolls out content and courses that's like, I will teach you how to be more like me and how to be smarter. Like, okay, obviously. Versus if you're watching like a very like, vlog, lifestyle, entertaining creator who you're watching for like that sense of escape. Like, I just don't have to think about things, right? I don't have to worry. I can feel better. And he comes out and he's like, let me teach you. You're going to get some people below him just going, what? Like, this is what I'm expecting. But if he comes out with maybe something like, oh, like, here's the behind the scenes on how I filmed this, or like, here's how I'm really feeling. Oh, then you might be like, okay, now I'm interested, right? So I do think you have to think about like, what's the type of value I'm offering as a creator to double down on when I do memberships?
Yeah, there's some unique approaches. I was having a conversation with somebody about the Unwell Network the other day, Alexander Cooper and Alex Earl. And both of them are pretty squarely sort of entertainment and lifestyle creators.
Lifestyle, yep.
But when you really unpack it, Alex Earl, a lot of women watch her content because they want to be her. She's very aspirational. And so there's a lot of things actually she could drive some transformation around, like how to be an influencer like me, or maybe you take the fashion angle, or you take, Alex Earl's very into fitness. I bet you there's a pretty sizable audience out there that might want to understand Alex Earl's nutrition and her fitness regime. Someone like
Yeah.
Alexandra Cooper, she really built her brand on the back of sort of direct, candid, impolite relationship advice. And that's,
Right.
we
Daddy.
know in the transformation realm that in the education realm that relationship advice is one of the best performing segments around.
Relationship advice podcasts are killing it. There's like a new meta. There's so many of them. They post on YouTube. They get hundreds of thousands of followers every time because, again, it's sort of that primal, like, what are the things people care most about, right? It's like, I want to figure out love, my career, existential satisfaction. So you're right. I think the entertaining creators can cross over into aspirational, right? Which then crosses over into, maybe I can be more like this person if I look at this, pay for this.
Yeah. Why do you think, well, we'll take Unwell Network, Alexandra Cooper and Alex Earl as an example. They've built a really big media brand and business around what they're doing. Right. Why do you think more creators aren't building those bigger businesses?
The number one thing I've seen is you're so caught up just in producing content, you can't think of anything else. This goes back to the very initial point on the gradual development of hiring this creative COO class. Because if you want to build something larger, something more scaled, you do need to figure out how to invest in building out people who can help you think through that next level of things. And also as a creator, many of them don't want to, right? From a business POV, they don't have interest. Like, there are creators, you can become truly massive. Like PewDiePie has never really built out like an empire of products and services.
True.
And that's fine. That really satisfies them. So yeah, I think it's a mix of lack of interest, and then it is just hard to find the time in between putting out every single video to scale yourself that way.
Yeah, I can see that. It's like you could almost place creators on like a skill versus will matrix. Yes. And like there's some people who just don't want to do it, so they're low on the will, or folks who don't have the skill, which you could say is they don't have the time, or maybe they don't even know the option is open to them.
Oh, totally.
In some cases. Is there anything about the creator operator world or the creator COO role today that you think we could bring awareness to or improve that would make the likelihood that creators are building these big businesses to increase?
I think the very first thing is this is a role that exists, and many of the top creators have specifically hired for this role, and look what they've been able to do to build and expand and scale. I think, again, one of our earlier points, the very first thing is just awareness and education. As a creator, if you want to scale yourself, you should hire a COO. Here's examples of creators who have done that and what their COOs do. And for yourself, here's the sorts of things that you should start to look for when you want to do this for yourself, and if you think you're ready.
If we wanted to curate, or if we wanted to create a bigger class of these types of COOs, where should we look to cultivate that talent?
So many of the good ones I've seen have a background in some aspect of media, right? Like you look at Mark Husfet, right? He comes from a story chain of media brands and companies, similar with Zach Miller. I think you look for people coming from media, even if those media formats are a little bit more older school than YouTube, right? Because they have experience. And before YouTube, there was like 50 gazillion other digital media properties and ways to build content and make a living from it. Eventually, over time, I think you'll see more and more CEOs who have cut their teeth like in the YouTube business specifically. But it's going to take time because it's just still so new.
It's such a young industry. Yeah, there's not a lot of. There's a very short list. You mentioned like Eric and Josh Mattingly, but there's not a lot of Josh Mattinglys in the industry today.
There's not. That's exactly
so we'd like to end this podcast with a couple pointed pieces of advice. What's the one piece of advice that you would give to a creator who's looking for their operating partner?
I actually turn on the creator and say, find the person that you can trust, because it doesn't matter how many resume bullet points or how many boxes that potential CEO partner has. As a creator, if you're not able to let go, it's never going to work. And because you've done things yourself for so long, successfully, I might add, guess what? When you now delegate this, it will not all be according to your vision. Things will be different. Things might potentially get missed in the beginning that when it was just you were able to do. And find the person where you have that relationship goodwill and you can be like, it's going to happen. And I can believe in their good intentions and give them a pass because it's part of the necessary growing pains. Otherwise, again, it doesn't matter. You could bring in the most impressively credentialed person in the world and they start to, things start to slip because it's inevitable when you're making that transition process, which you need to scale. And, you're like, oh, I don't know. Then it's sunk. There's really no point continuing.
That's a great piece of advice. Thanks for your time, Eric.
Likewise, Matt. Absolute pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Creator COO. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. Also, please consider giving us a rating and a review, as this helps other creators and creator COOs like you to find the podcast. This episode was produced by Rebecca Donovan at Uscreen with support from the team at Share Your Genius. It was edited by Chandler Chappell with artwork design by Spencer Marsh. I'm Matt Estes, and you've been listening to The Creator COO. See you next time.